So this past week, Harvard University announced that students whose annual family income is under $200,000 will now be able to attend Harvard tuition-free. And if family income is less than $100,000, food, housing, health insurance, and travel will also be completely free. Do you foresee something like this also happening at UVA?
It's already happening. I think they copied us.
Really? In what way?
At my inauguration, I announced that Virginia applicants from families earning, I don't even get the numbers right, I think $80,000 would come tuition free, and under $40,000 would be tuition, room, and board. And then just last year, we increased that to $100,000 and I think $50,000 or $60,000. So when I read that from Harvard, I thought, oh my gosh, they're copying UVA.
We have an imitator on our hands. If you don't mind, I'd like to go back and touch on an event that struck the UVA community pretty tragically, which is to say the 2022 shooting of 3 students here on grounds. An independent review of this incident is now complete, but it has not been released. In recent weeks, there have been 2 lockdowns here at UVA, one of them gun-related. What are the findings of the 2022 shooting review, and what steps has UVA taken to better protect the community against gun violence?
So the report is going to be released very soon, within a week. So you may have followed this. We had an external review done, and then we're told by the prosecutor that it might interfere with the criminal case. So our plan was to do the review and then release it. And once the prosecutor said it could interfere with the case, we thought, okay, we're going to have to hold it, which was not my first choice because I know a lot of people are interested in reading the report. Then once Christopher Jones pleaded guilty and the sentencing hearing was scheduled for a month or 2 after he pleaded guilty, we thought, okay, well, we'll wait until after the sentencing hearing. And then the sentencing hearing got postponed until this November. And the prosecutor said, I'm really not that concerned about it being released. So that will come out within a week. There are a lot of redactions because of federal privacy laws around student records. So I think part of the report will be a little frustrating to read. I'm just going to be honest about it. It does include information about the steps that we have taken with respect to increasing safety, some of which were on display on the lockdowns. One of the biggest things we've done is add to the threat assessment team because there's been an uptick in cases. So they have more capacity. Some of it has been changes around how we deal with student affairs, and how we deal with searches of rooms. So we've done a lot, and we started doing this even before the report came in because we did our own review before the external review occurred. One of the things that we have been trying to get past but haven't been successful is closing a loophole in gun legislation. So there is a law passed not that long ago that prohibits the possession of a firearm in any state-owned building, but there's an exception for universities. And the reason for the exception, my understanding, is there are ROTC programs and VMI, and it was thought, well, there needs to be an exception, but instead of having a narrow exception, they just made an exception for all universities. So we have basically been trying to close that loophole. And part of the reason that's important is right now it is against policy to have a gun in, say, a dorm room. But the university police can't search a room for a violation of a policy. So it has to be a student affairs person, which is obviously a little risky. So if you're hearing that someone has a gun in a dorm room, you probably want to have someone from the university police who's trained to do the search. If this were prohibited by criminal law, we could do that. Right now, it's tricky because it's just a violation of policy as opposed to a violation of the law. So it's a long answer, but there's been a lot going on in this space for sure.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Another topic of great concern, not only to students at UVA, but college students across the country, is the protection of their First Amendment rights.
Yeah.
As you know, last May, there was a forcible removal of pro-Palestinian protesters here on grounds by the Virginia State Police.
Yeah.
This action, as I'm sure you remember, was not without quite a bit of controversy.
Sure.
Looking back almost a year later, is there anything that you would do differently?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When we have someone doing an external review to give us ideas about how we could do it differently. So I would say, as a matter of principle, I believe deeply in free speech. I also believe in time, place, and manner restrictions that are content neutral. And those sound like just bureaucratic rules, but the basic importance of those are it actually protects everyone's ability to speak, and it also allows speech to occur, but also the business of the university to occur. And so if you think about, there are rules around when you can use amplified sound and where you can use it. So if there were a protest right outside of a classroom and there wasn't permission to use amplified sound and someone is using a bullhorn, it's hard for the class to go on. So I think enforcing those rules in a neutral way is absolutely important. I don't think anyone wanted the state police to have to come in at the end. So my biggest question is, how do we avoid that from happening? And part of having the external review is to look through this and give us a sense of, okay, were there points in time where if you had tried this or tried this or tried that, you could have come to a resolution that didn't involve having to have the state police having to come in?
In a virtual town hall following the incident and the student arrests, you lamented that UVA had lost the level of trust with its students. Do you feel since then that the university has rebuilt that trust?
It's a hard thing to measure, honestly. I mean, I think some of the rebuilding of the trust is being open to bringing in someone from the outside and say, could we have done this better? And also, what is the timeline? I think one of the things that sparked the reaction, which I completely understand. I mean, it is disturbing to see all of a sudden there are state police coming. Is like coming in on the last scene of a movie. So people didn't understand all the steps that were taken before then to avoid that outcome. That said, if there are other things that we could do to avoid that being the ending of a protest, I think everyone would like to try those things.
Mm-hmm. Well, switching gears a bit, the Supreme Court has struck down affirmative action, and in line with the wishes of the Trump administration, the UVA Board of Visitors has recently voted unanimously to eliminate all DEI initiatives at the university. So my question is to you is, what actions have you taken in this regard, and what is the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion here at school?
So I need to correct you in how you describe the board's vote. So it's really important, and I would suggest this to anyone listening, look at the board's resolution. They did not eliminate all DEI initiatives. They asked for two things. One is to dissolve the central DEI office and move legally permissible programs to another organizational home in the university, which might just be another office. That's number one. Number two, they asked for a review of programs and policies to make sure that they're not violating the law, either civil rights law or the Constitution. That is a far cry from eliminating all initiatives related to diversity, equity, inclusion. The way I look at it is, I think it's important to understand that, so the central DEI office currently houses like the Office for Civil Rights, a tribal liaison, community partnerships, things that I don't necessarily think people think about when they think about DEI. And a lot of those functions are critical, and we will find a home for them. With respect to the programmatic review, I think reviewing programs and policies to make sure that they're following the law is an absolutely responsible thing to do. And in fact, we did something similar. You mentioned the court's affirmative action case that had to deal with college admissions. We did that after the college admissions decision as well. So in some respects, this is an update on that. The most important thing to understand is a lot of the work that's related to diversity, equity, and inclusion happens across the university, from student affairs to admissions to in the schools. And I don't think that anyone is opposed to the idea of diversity. I don't think anyone is opposed to, I think of equity as providing people an opportunity to succeed. That word has become supercharged because some think that equity means you're guaranteeing equal results. That's not how I think of it. I think of it as creating opportunity. I don't think anyone is against the idea that when we invite students here, we should give them every opportunity to succeed. And I don't think anyone's against the idea that if you're inviting students to the university, you should be doing whatever you can to make them feel at home. That work will continue. And our values around that and my values around that have not changed in the least. I absolutely believe that diversity is a strength, not a weakness. And I don't think that there's any tension between diversity and merit. I think actually diversity, it works in furtherance of merit. Think about financial aid, right? With a generous financial aid program, you're able to bring in a much more socioeconomically diverse group of students, which means you're able to bring in students who wouldn't otherwise be here, who are incredibly talented and now have the opportunity to be here. I don't think trying to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to succeed makes us a weaker university. I think it's part of our job. And I also don't think that it's contrary to the values of UVA for us to make people feel like they're at home. And I am confident that all of those efforts will continue. Now, that said, DEI as an acronym has obviously become polarizing. And there are aspects of DEI that tilt really hard in one ideological direction. I wrote an essay about this in Inside Higher Ed about, 6 or 8 months ago, and made the same point I'll make right now, which is we should pay attention to those programs that seem to be pushing one particular perspective and ask whether those are consistent with the university and with academic freedom. But we shouldn't give up on the idea that there's real value to diversity, there's real value to creating opportunities, and there's real value to making people feel like they're at home. And I still feel like that's the right path.
Well, after this unanimous decision by the Board of Visitors, you released a statement to the school on March 11th in which you told students directly, quote, "I hope this goes without saying, but I will say it anyway. All of you deserve to be here and belong here." What would you say to students who might feel like this claim from you could possibly contradict this action taken by the board, the central dissolving of DEI here at school?
I would explain to them what I just explained to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Trump administration is dramatically slashing NIH federal research funding for schools like UVA. Recent funding cuts at Columbia University and Johns Hopkins have totaled $1.2 billion. What could such cuts mean to UVA's aggressive research programs in health and data science, and how will UVA respond?
So it would be devastating if we lost that amount of federal funding. I don't know exactly what is being cut at Columbia. Johns Hopkins, I think, is related a lot to USAID research. The other funding cuts that you're talking about that are now currently enjoined by a court are the indirect costs reimbursement from NIH. That was, I think, what made a lot of us at research universities nervous. So there was a proposal to limit the reimbursement of indirect costs to 15%, which would mean universities like UVA getting far less funding for research than they otherwise would. This matters more than people might think who aren't steeped in how research funding works. Because you hear indirect costs and you think, oh, well, you can get away with not spending a lot on indirect costs. But the labels are sort of misleading because indirect costs cover things like a piece of equipment that you need to actually do the research. So that's why it is such a big deal. And we have been doing all sorts of scenario planning, trying to figure out, okay, what is the landscape going to look like? What would our response be? And the challenge is there's no obvious way to make up the loss of $100 or $200 million in federally funded research. I mean, that's just the reality. So my hope is that there will be a way through this that preserves funding for federal research, but probably will come up with a different model. I mean, I think there's very little chance that the current formulas that are used for federal research will stay exactly the same. I think that there's going to be, I think there will be revision to that. And I think that universities need to be involved in that conversation in order to enable people to understand, like, instead of dividing the world up into direct and indirect costs, you should just recognize that there's a price that research costs. And you should decide how much is the federal government going to cover and how much should universities have to cover. And I think the conversation should go along those lines. One of the things that is important to understand is that there has been a partnership between the federal government and research universities since World War II, where there was a decision to basically farm out research through a competitive process to a bunch of different universities, rather than the federal government decide, well, we're just going to do all the research in-house. And that basic approach has been unbelievably successful for the country. There's a reason why higher education in the United States is still the envy of the entire world, and a lot of it has to do with the research enterprise and how it's been funded. I still think that is a great way to fund research, and there's been a great return on investment to the federal government. So my hope is that there will be a way through this where we stop talking about overhead and indirect versus direct costs and just have the conversation about, okay, what does research cost and what should institutions bear and what should the federal government cover?